Yora, today I'm looking into whether Z Energy is truly cutting emissions or just putting on a green image. Z Energy is one of New Zealand's biggest fuel suppliers. That means their carbon footprint and how they respond to it has significant impact on our society. In this presentation, I will look at what they have done, what they have claimed, and how it all can be assessed using NEEM's integrated framework of greenwashing. Here is my presentation overview. First, I will explain why I picked Z Energy. Then I will talk about their emissions and what they are doing to offset them. I will then move on to talk about how I carried out my research. And then to wrap up, I will share some recommended steps that Z Energy could take to cut emissions. Next, why Z Energy? I chose Z Energy because it's a major fuel company in New Zealand. And since Ample took over in 2022, they have rolled out EV chargers, carbon offsets, and emission targets to cut emissions. But then most of their emissions come from the fuel they sell, and those are not included in their targets. This raises real questions about how committed they are to climate action. Next, we will look at their carbon valuation approach. Z Energy engage in carbon valuation by doing these three things. One, publishing annual greenhouse gas inventories report. Two, tracking operational and product-related emissions. And three, purchasing carbon offsets. According to 2024 data, as we can see here, we can see that Z Energy sent out about total emissions of approximately 12.76 million tons of CO2. And in those, more than 99% is from Scope 3 emissions, which are indirect greenhouse gas emissions from them. And this chart shows that Z Energy's total emissions have increased from the year 2020 to 2024, while they have promoted carbon offsets. As we can see here, in 2023, but less than 1% of their emissions were actually offset in that year. This suggests that offsets are more about reputation than real impact. According to NEEM's framework, this kind of approach fits the patterns of greenwashing, when companies focus on looking sustainable instead of truly cutting emissions at the source. Here is how I carried out my research. First, I reviewed Z's annual reports from the year 2020 to 2024. I then also look at their greenhouse gas inventories report and also their 2023 climate statements. I also checked complaints from Consumer NZ and reports from the Environmental Law Initiative. I then compared Z public claims with emissions data and also assessed them using the greenwashing framework. Here, this is important to recognize bias when assessing Z's actions. One, while they promote EVs and clean technology, emissions keep rising, and this shows a gap between what they claims and what the society sees. Second, Ample's profit focus may explain why Scope 3 has been left out and no action has been done. And thirdly, I personally value climate accountability. But in my research, I've cross-checked multiple sources in order to stay fair. Here are some insights that I found from Z's recent reports. In 2024, Scope 3 emissions hit 12.7 million tons CO2, which mainly come from the fuel use. These emissions remain outside their reduction targets, with no binding plan to address them. This gap signals a lack of transparency and reflects greenwashing tactics like selective disclosure. So now let's look at what can Z do right now. Firstly, they can stop calling fuels carbon neutral unless all emissions, especially Scope 3, are fully and clearly reported. Secondly, they should set clear targets that cover all the three scopes, not just direct emissions. And thirdly, Z should clearly report the full environmental impact on its fuel products, including emissions from production, distribution, and also the end use. Now let's look ahead. Z should keep investing in cleaner fuel options like biofuel and synthetic fuels. They also need to expand EV charging, especially in the rural areas and for commercial fleets, to make low-emission transport more practical. And lastly, to earn public trust, all green claims should be checked by independent experts to avoid greenwashing and keep things transparent. Here are some challenges and risks. Z still relies heavily on fossil fuel sales, so shifting to cleaner energy is not just a climate decision, it's also a financial risk too. Public trust has also been another challenge for the company. And finally, uncertainty around new technology and changing government policies makes it harder for the energy sector to plan long term. To conclude, Z Energy must match its ambitions with measurable reductions and be held accountable for its full emission footprint.